world has written books that have sold by millions. So Ronald Laing is very well known to you all, and so is Leo Matos from the invitation. And just to give more time to the speakers, I won't give all the introduction. Should anyone want to know more, you can see by this invitation. And they will now present the topic, Transpersonal Psychology and Psychiatry, and Leo Matos will start giving a presentation about 20 minutes, and then I think we continue directly with Dr. Laing, and then we'll have a discussion. And I hope you can hear up on the boards and wherever you are. We have an internal TV presentation. Dr. Matos, welcome.
Thank you. Well, I like to start. Do you have it?
Okay. Sorry. Is that okay?
If I can move a little bit, it's okay.
Well, not very much.
Okay, I want to start by defining the term transpersonal. I believe most of you are acquainted with the term. However, I'm going to define the term. And when we talk about transpersonal psychology and transpersonal psychiatry, would be more accurate to talk about a transpersonal approach. Transpersonal don't need necessarily to be an approach exclusively to psychology and psychiatry, but it's also to medicine, to biology, to astronomy, and very specifically to modern physics. You see, the word transpersonal is composed of two words, trans and personal. And trans, you know, is, means going beyond. Personal is related to the person, to the persona, to the individual. So all types of psychology and the psychiatry treat the human being, the man and woman, like an individual per se, or like an individual in society in relation to the environment, but always like more or less a separated entity of everything else. We know that all sciences, medicine, biology, psychology, psychiatry, etc., they are based in classical physics, in Newtonian physics. We know that Newtonian physics has its own philosophy, which is the Cartesian philosophy. In the Cartesian philosophy, we have a very sharp separation between what Descartes called spirit and matter. And you know very well the famous phrases of Descartes, je pense donc je suis, that I think, then I am, or then I exist. Now, when you analyze the sentence of Descartes, when he says I, je pense, I, he is referring, who is this really, who is this I? So in reality, he is referring to an image which he has of himself, which what in psychology we call the self-image, or the person you believe you are, like a mirror, you're saying that is me, Leo or Peter or John or this or that. Now, when you refer to this image is somehow and more or less conceptually isolated of everything else. Let's see if I can move it to make something here. I try. Let's suppose this is a person. We could say this is Descartes, for example. And when he say, je pense, I, or in Swedish, I think you write like that. No, jag, is that Swedish? So you refer to an image which you have of yourself, and this image has this basic characteristic of being separated conceptually of everything else. You have images of other people, image of trees, of cars, everything. Now, one of the basic postulates of Newtonian physics on describing the universe is saying that this universe is composed by almost infinity of separated objects obeying fundamental laws. Now, you see, Newton, he talked about separated objects. And we can agree with Newton. We look around, say, I am here, you are here, and here is my watch, there's a book, there's a tape recorder, outside there is a car. So you can count, or almost not count, so many objects. And you look to yourself, and you can say, here I am, and here is your world in front of me. Or you can say, I am inside the world, and there we are many people, many objects, many things. Okay, today, with the latest developments of modern physics, or to be more precise, high-energy physics, all postulates of classical Newtonian physics do not apply any longer to high-energy physics. While Newton describes the universe like an almost infinity of separated objects, in high-energy physics, the universe is described like one gigantic dynamic web. So what does this mean? So it means that everything, I, you, the air, the ground, the stars, the cars, the trees, the roads, the flowers, the clouds, everything in reality is a dynamic pattern of energy which is moving. So that is a statement of high-energy physics. So when you come to this point, so you start not to see the universe any longer as separated objects, but you start to see a connection, which really is a connection with everything. And everything is dynamic and moving. So this image which I create of myself, the I, or the ego. Remember, I'm not saying the ego here in the Freudian sense. I'm saying just translating the jag to Latin, ego. This ego is a convention that we have created to function in this society here. And more or less everything which we experience, what we have experienced, is reflected in this image. Now, the question would be, what would happen if we would be able to go beyond this image? I mean, not just intellectually, but existentially. So if you would go, if you would transcend this image, you remember the word transcend is coming from Latin. Transcendo means climbing over. So if you're climbing over this concept or this convention that you have, if you would be able to do that, so you would attain a state of consciousness, a experience which is described by modern physics. So you would sense it, you would feel, you would experience these patterns of energy. So you would get a feeling which was described in the end of this century by maybe one of the first transpersonal psychologists, was William James, which he calls the experience of oneness. You feel one with everything. He calls it also the cosmic consciousness. Very often, you think that you are in Sweden. And I could go, well, you are not really in Sweden. You are in the cosmos, aren't you? If you really expand your view, you are in the cosmos all the time, but you close yourself, let's say, to a country, to a city, to a hospital, to an image of yourself. It's like being part of everything, and somehow I start to shrink like that. So what transpersonal psychology is doing is very specifically studying states of consciousness, both which happen in this level, which we can call the level of the individual psychology, as well as in the level which transcend these limitations imposed by the image which we have of each one of us. So when you transcend this, you enter what is called a transpersonal experience. Before going into the, I'll tell a little story about the transpersonal psychology and I will stop. But I just want to point out to you what is the meaning when you think in psychotherapeutic terms. What is the meaning of going into a transpersonal experience? What is that for? Why you would facilitate a person to have this state of consciousness? Now, if you think again that you are here in Sweden, right now, you are in the planet Earth, you are in the solar system, you are in the universe. In terms of modern physics, you cannot even say that you are inside of the universe or outside. You cannot even say it would be absurd in terms of high energy physics to say that you are part of the universe. Would it be more correct to say that you are the universe? This is not psychology, this is physics. Since everything is just one pattern, your individuation, being an individual, is something, if you look at this at a cosmic level, and if you are able to abstract time out of that, so you are just this, so you appear and disappear in this, you can call it mixture of matter energy, inter and interacting all the time. Now, if the universe is flowing energy, so your natural state of health, your natural state of body and mind would be flowing, would be accepting the transformation with what is happening in your body all the time. Like, for example, death and dying. When we talk about death, we think about something in the future. Most people, they either say they have repressed the idea of death, and they say, well, I don't want to talk about that. Or if they talk about that, to them something very vague in the future. This kind of death doesn't exist, really, except in your own fantasy. The only death which is real is the one which is happening here now. Death is not in the future, it's here now. Your body is dying right now. Cells are dying in your body. New cells are being born. This is the physical level. If you look in the emotional level, also you're going to see transformations. In the mental level, everything is flowing energy. Now, when I get caught in the belief that I am this image of myself, you see, I believe I am the image, so I limit myself. So I start to live in a level which I would call the Cartesian Newtonian level of reality, of total separateness. And I don't want you misunderstand that I'm trying to deny this level. This level is very, very, very important. Because we experience this reality like everything is separated, is that we are able to live and somehow to survive in this society. So in the morning when you awake, you know who you are supposed to be. You are the doctor, the other is bus driver, the other is the engineer, or whatever you are. So you can function in this society. But when I get caught in the idea that that is all, so I limit myself when I limit myself, so what I'm doing, I'm blocking myself. It's like when you tense your body. If you can try this, you tense your body. If you let it tense for very long, you start to get pain. You may get sick if you do that. So this can be one of ways of getting sick. And when conceptually I block, so this reflects also in my body and in all my system. If you want to divide it between psychological and physical system, in whole, my organism is affected. And what happens in reality is that I am entering in a state of disharmony with the whole process of this universe, which is just flowing. So you see, it's a dissonance between what I call I and the whole cosmos and this whole pattern of energy. So I isolate myself here, I alienate myself, I start to get afraid of people. Who is this people here now? What they are thinking about me? Am I performing well now? Do they understand what I start to shrink, which is one approach to life. So in those approaches say, well, we are here now. Okay? That's one level of reality, which is very important. And there is another level also, and they exist simultaneously. So the meaning of bringing a person, I don't like very much to use the word patient because of the Latin origin of patient, which has to do with passivity. I call patient a person. When you bring a person into other levels of awareness, what happens, to put it in very simple terms of energy, the person starts to unblock energy which was repressed. If you want to put it in another context, so you can say that traumatic situations, trauma is nothing else but pain which has been kept inside you, which you experience subjective, like a kind of negative energy which has a self-destructive power. So when you move away from this, you transcend this image, or you move to another level of consciousness, so you start to unblock the energy which have been blocked. Now, there are hundreds of techniques to do that, and I don't think we have time today to talk about these techniques. I want just to use a couple of minutes more to tell you about the history of transpersonal psychology. When we talk about transpersonal psychology, it's nothing new in reality. When we talk in psychology in the West, we have many people have a kind of I would call superior attitude, say, oh, only we know, only we are civilized. So in transpersonal psychology, we try to be open, let's say panoramic, open-minded, and we see any psychology which has existed in a cross-cultural and historical context as a psychology to be studied. So let's say the psychology of the pre-Columbian civilizations in America, the shamanistic psychologists, the Tibetan psychology, the Hinduist psychology, the Christian psychology. So then for us, religion is not religion anymore. It's just a system of psychology which can be studied, and eventually you can use something of that system and techniques which can be integrated into a psychotherapeutic context. So transpersonal psychology is nothing new. But in the West, this was systematized like a body of knowledge, and one of the pioneers is Dr. Ronald Laing, and he is the first one who uses the term transpersonal, which is in one of his books called The Politics of Experience, which was published in 1966. And the other founders of this school of psychology and psychiatry are Abraham Maslow and the Anton Suchich and the Stanislaw Grof. The first journal of transpersonal psychology was published in the United States in the autumn of '69. We had the first Congress of Transpersonal Psychology in 1972 in Iceland. And from '72 until now, in 1982, we have had 6 congresses already. Congresses which are attended not only by psychologists and psychiatrists, but very much by high-energy physicists, by biologists, and people of different professions, different scientists gathering together, making possible the emergence of a new paradigm in science. And it's like psychology has been some 50 or 60 years behind physics. And now what we are trying to do with transpersonal psychology is caught up with physics. So now on Sunday, we are starting our 7th International Congress of Transpersonal Psychology. It's going to be in Bombay. We have had it in different places of the world, in the United States, in Australia. And we are expecting more than 1,000 people from all over the world attending this Congress. So I want to finish now and give the word to Dr. Laing.
Could we tie you up here?
Right, cheers. Very good.
Make sure. You want to use it there?
Sure.
Yes.
Before I start, let me check up that you're hearing me all right, and this is this sound system functioning fine? Well, I had prepared, I have prepared a closely knit written exposition for you this afternoon, but if you'll allow me to speak more spontaneously, I'll do so in the hope that you won't feel that in doing so I'm not haven't done my homework in what we're talking about. Because I would like to continue from what Dr. Matos has been saying about the nature of this old animal with a somewhat new name of transpersonal. As he was saying, psychology, as it has come to be practiced and as it's been adopted and entered into and come out of psychiatry, remains for the most part caught up in mechanistic Newtonian, Galilean and Descartesian models of reality. And this, I think, I don't have to argue here. I don't have to argue this out. Is manifestly after Einstein and everything since then is as sort of Paleolithic psychology compared to where particularly the physicists have got to. In this Congress in Bombay, for instance, there are people going to be there which range from the Dalai Lama on the one hand to Nobel Prize winning physicists on the other. And the problematic is, from the point for us psychologists and psychiatrists, is has got a number of features, and let me perhaps divide them into three headings. In the first place, there's a really major theoretical task from a psychiatric and psychological point of view, which we will just allude to in the first place, of being able to express in equivalent degrees of clarity and sophistication a paradigm that complements and reflects and matches those of our contemporary physicists. When we have this situation of separate objects in space obeying the same laws, we're not talking about physics anymore, we're talking about the modern totalitarian state, of which Sweden is an example. We have separate objects, you and me. You're all separate objects in space and time, and you all obey the same laws for all of you, and if you don't obey them, too bad for you. That fair enough? That's not your fault. That's not an accusation. That's a gesture of sympathy. Because the deposit of this way of thinking is deposited in the structure of our society. And the structure of our society, based on separate objects, all qualitatively alike, no qualitative difference, and all objects, and all obeying the same laws, is a very quick, rapid way of stating the paradigm of the modern state. Now, I find even more sinister than Descartes is Galileo. If we take Galileo, you might say, as a symbolic marker for a moment in European consciousness and contrast him to Giordano Bruno, it is significant that Giordano Bruno, the speculative philosopher, was the one who was arrested, tortured, and killed, whereas Galileo got off with house arrest and being confined to his excellent wine cellar and being asked to keep his mouth shut. He could and not spread his message around to the vulgar too much. Bruno said, we must allow for a situation of not only that the infinitude of the world, but the open possibility of an infinite number of possible worlds. He didn't say there is only one world, there is only one set of the same sorts of qualitatively interchangeable objects, all separate and forever alone in space, and the mystery is how they ever action at a distance ever occurs, which puzzled Newton and nearly drove him crazy. So it seems that the way we went was in the direction of Galileo. And what Galileo proposed, and you'll find it in the Novum Organum and elsewhere, was two things, two aspects, which I think both are equally profound and equally paradigmatic of our mode of thought and the type of society that is predicated upon our mode of thought, and which continues to have a dialectic interplay between each other, the way we see things and the way we act towards each other in the light of the way we see things. In the first place, Galileo proposed that science, and remember, when he used the word science, he's not using it in the way we use it now, 400 or 500 years after him. He was using it in the way it was understood before. It was a word, he's at the beginning of modern science. So when he uses the word science, he's not using it with all the history of the last century since him. In order to know what is really important to know, we should, he said, try to investigate the world as though there was no living creature in it, as though there was no consciousness, as though all human beings were dead. He said, imagine what might be here if we were all dead and there was no living creatures, not only human beings, but no living creatures of any kind to project our apparitions of sight, sound, taste, touch and smell and time and our experience upon whatever is the case. Let's eliminate ourselves completely. We will abolish ourselves. We will suppose that we are not only unconscious, we will suppose that we are actually dead. And we will investigate the remainder, what we imagine might be there if we weren't there. And that is a really, and that is a thought of genius. That, I think, more than simply applying, as he did, the technology of the telescope and so forth in his experimentation, that is a thought of profound genius, which has changed the whole world by eliminating ourselves from it. And, of course, when we eliminate ourselves from the world, we eliminate our world. What is our world of experience, the world we actually live in, our Erlebnis, our actually lived experience of the world we experience, is eliminated and consigned to so-called secondary qualities. the primary qualities are forever unexperienceable by us, because anything we can experience is not what science wants to investigate. As soon as we investigate some aspect of our real lived experience world, we're not being Galilean anymore. So what is the use to a scientist of that world? This world, our world? Well, I asked a very well-known physicist that question a little while ago, and he asked me, please don't use my name when you tell them what I said. I asked him, well, what is it all doing here? I mean, what is it, all this, you know, to you as a mathematical theoretical physicist? And he looked around at it. I mean, you never thought of that, but he said, well, I suppose it's very useful. Now, with the whole world, as we live in it, as it is lived by us, has simply become a very treacherous and imperfect scientific instrument. It's simply a tool. It's something to be used to penetrate beyond it. If we get in the right way of penetrating it to get beyond it, then we can use the world. We can use the whole world as a tool to go beyond it. He said, some months later I met him again, and he said, I admit I said that, but I don't want you to use my, don't tell him that I said that. And it actually changed his mind, he said, having realized that that's what he did think as a physicist. Now, when we've abolished the world in theory like that, it seems only a footnote to wait for us to demolish it in practice. We've already destroyed the world, discarded the world in that Galilean sense of theory. And when we do that, we know that we set a ball rolling, that it seems only a technological footnote now to destroy it in practice, as it has already been done in theory. I'm not going to labour the point that the world that we actually live in is not my subjective experience. It's not inside my head. It's not an epiphenomenon of my brain. It's not inside rather than outside the world, and you and us here are all together, and it's neither inside or outside. And it is normalized, if you like, as it were. It's a normalized hallucination, hallucinatory delusional system that we are fundamentally characterizable as separate, independent, quantitative objects in space which mysteriously hallucinate back to themselves the appearance of being people living in an actual world together. And so the modern state has got to enact laws which cannot be qualitatively different, but have to be quantitatively the same, to be applied to everyone quantitatively equally, with and so, I mean, the logical end of that is that we might as well simply have everything computerized and have ourselves computerized. The computers will govern us because all they do is calculate quantity and permutate and combinate. They can't think, and that's thought is the last thing that we want in that system. And the second thing that Galileo and not the Galilean, the Descartian, and the Francis Baconian scientific world has, or scientific paradigm that I want to mention is proposed to us. It comes from Bacon, which is Francis Bacon. I'm sorry that earlier I think in a few sentences I used the word Galileo when I meant to use the word Bacon. But we're now talking about Bacon, and we're talking about we're putting together Galileo, Bacon, and Descartes. Bacon had a slightly more romantic, you might say, idea of nature than Galileo, but they go together. He said, nature is a lady. Nature is a woman. And the scientific project is to find out the secrets of nature. Nature used to be the mother goddess in which we all were, as it were, in her womb, in the womb of the sky and in the earth and so on. We're in her. But we are outside of nature. We're not inside nature as a maternal womb. We're outside this woman, looking at her from the outside. And she, nature, who is outside us, this woman, is free and at large, as he puts it. She is free and at large. We'll never find out her secrets by allowing her to remain free and at large. We have got to capture her, to constrain her, to vex her, and to torture her. And we will torture the secrets out of nature, then we'll wring the truth out of her as we torture the witches. Now, for the feminists here and anyone else who's sensitive to that sort of thing, I hope I don't have to sort of indicate the extent of that as a scientific, political, ideological, ontological program, and the extent, whichever way you like to put it, of the divorce and lack of friendliness, lack of love between man standing on the outside of everything that we might say we're inside, with no other interest in nature but to torture her secrets out of her. And so the modern scientific laboratory has become the torture chamber of nature. Scientific laboratories are the torture chambers of nature, as proposed explicitly by Francis Bacon, who was the Lord Chancellor of England at the time of torture, and who signed the appropriate forms for appropriate authorizations of torture in the time of Shakespeare. The last point, then, I want to make, and I'm take another 2 or 3 minutes to make it, and then Dr. Matos and I will be available for discussion for a little while. It's all very well talking theoretically about these things, but it doesn't get us very far talking theoretically about these things unless we are able not only to adopt a new theoretical paradigm, which is more in line with the insights of these natural scientists who have gone the whole circle in a way and come back to a realization that as the Prigozhin and others say, we've got to somehow or other put consciousness back into our equations, because here we sit and we elaborate our tautological laws of tautological spinning out of mathematical equations. And what are these but the regularities and formalisms and of our own minds, of our own consciousness, and then as we, with more and more sophisticated probes, investigate this physical world, we keep on finding in the physical world sort of reflections of our equations. Now, how does that come about? How does it come about that this consciousness has eliminated itself from the physical world finds its reflection in the physical world? And how does the physical world seem to find, as it were, its conscious reflection in the mind that reflects upon it? It doesn't seem that having started from this schizoid duality, that we don't find a schizoid duality, we find a dual unity. But this dual unity remains inexplicable within the paradigm that it began with and ends up by depassing, by destroying its own origin. That's fine. The physicists don't mind that at all. They love it, and they're deeply puzzled, of course. But I mean, that's they love it. But we've got ourselves so programmed now that we actually experience ourselves in terms of this hallucinated, delusional, separated paradigm where we're all separate objects in space, all obeying the same laws, or else. So this means that unless we're very rare people who are able to operate within a society that is predicated upon this, you might say, in a sense. You know, I must ask you not to forget the qualifications that I use at that point of, in a sense, as it were, or metaphorically, or by analogy, the, in a sense, hallucinations that comprise this skin-encapsulated egoic body image of ourselves. So people, I would say, the great majority of people are terrified to discover what awaits them if they abandon that paradigm not only in theory, but in their own experience. And this is where a good deal, not all, but a good deal, whether you to regard it as a lot or but certainly among the people who come to us as psychiatrists, as psychiatric patients, some of them have run in their lives to such a non-composable set of contradictory and paradoxical situations that this paradigm in their own experience has partially broken down without them having gone the whole way and without having dissolved totally and completely, and without them being able to integrate that realization with the life that they and we all have to live in our society as we find it. So that in the Western world pays highly for its contradictions. There's quite a number of our own population are in states of confusion and bewilderment and consternation and terror and fright and so on, because they are not able to hold together this experiential shadow of the Galilean, Descartesian and Baconian paradigm, and they haven't been able to cross the river the whole way to the other side. So they get, as it were, shipwrecked somewhere between. As psychiatrists and psychotherapists who profess to be able to be of some service to people in distressed states of mind, we cannot expect to be of any help of beyond pulling people back to this side into this socially reinforced totalitarian, egalitarian, quantitative, dequantified, de-experientialized, dead world where there's no fun or joy or any genuine celebration of anything, because all that is life, and science is studying death, not even death. We can't expect to be of any genuine service to people beyond imprisoning them, locking them up, monitoring them, surveilling them, looking at them, itemizing quantifiable and repeatable, reliable pieces of data, putting it into a computer, getting out arrays of things, giving drugs, giving electric shocks, and this or that or whatnot, and giving depot injections and putting people back more or less zombified, more or less robotized, back out in the streets, and that's that, and that's a good outcome. We can't expect to do any more than that, because if we're imprisoned in this dreadful mental nightmare ourselves, we can't expect to help other people get beyond it. But there is an open door. There are many open doors. It's an open secret. It's all around, but the dangers of getting out of our enclosed space capsules that we're in, our own straitjackets, our own imposed prisons and reciprocally imposed prisons, are quite real. Otherwise we wouldn't have so many patients. And psychiatrists, I would say, as a profession, are perhaps more afraid of the mind than any other profession. As Adolf Meyer said, the occupational disease of psychiatrists is psychophobia. psychiatrists, as I mean, I'm not speaking individually or personally, but characterizing a certain trend within the psychiatric profession is a condition, you might say, of psychophobia, the fear of the psyche, because psychiatrists can see what happens to people who don't, whose ordinary ego dissolves to some extent, but who don't find a way of functioning in an integrated manner within our society. In other words, psychiatrists are terrified to become patients because they know perfectly well what happens to a patient. With good reason. But all is not lost, all is not... There have been waiting for thousands of years the still small voices of the world's sages who have presented us with access to very simple procedures of which are not excited or violent or alarming, or which are so simple that they're so difficult. The simple is often the most difficult of the lot, and the most despised of the lot, and the least understood of the lot, and the most forgotten of the lot. These terms go under, you might say, the general heading of meditation, and different traditional practices of dissolving this ignorance of the world as it actually is, which ignorance is both in the Christian tradition, the Judaic tradition, in the Islamic tradition, and in the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, all equate ignorance with what in Christianity is called sin, which is not disobeying the law, as St. Paul says, the law brought sin into the world. The belief in the law is the deepest Christian sin. But you're not taught that at Sunday school. So there are ways and means of remedying this situation insofar as it is within our power to do so, and not forgetting that it all depends ultimately, in the end and in the beginning, on the grace of God. But nevertheless, there's an old saying that God helps them who helps themselves. Right.
Chamber, which we have in the basement here. And some of those working in the chamber are sitting around. And I wonder, while we're waiting for questions, we're thinking about what you say to the young students here, if there is a torture chamber of science, and you talk about a door and a river, do you think it's possible to work through this torture chamber to cross the river? You talked about the door, but not the tool to use to cross the river. And do you think it's possible through science and torture chamber to come out through the door on the other side for a better life? Or you think there is a shortcut?
I think that one's not going to get any distance with a methodology of cruelty. That one's got to propose as a fundamental principle of therapy that one is going to attempt to do no harm, harmlessness. I mean, we've left love out of our scientific epistemology. There's no place in love in the scientific epistemology. There's no the relationship between ourselves and that object or that thing or that person or that situation which we study is quite decisive in what we draw out of it. So if we operate with I don't mean that all laboratory work is necessarily an instance of torture, but I do think that a lot of it is. I don't think that one finds out what. I mean, if I wanted to get to know a lady, I wouldn't think that the best way to get to know her in the way that I would like to get to know her is by torturing her. I really do think I know my dog at home much better than I would know about her than if I put her in a harness and cut her up in slices and all the rest of it, and then studied how the bits twitched and salivated when I applied electrical impulses to it. I then wondered how the central nervous system manages to integrate the whole thing together. I mean, it's like taking an apple and cutting it up, and they say, well, what's the integrative function? There must be something that holds all this apple slices together. So we invent marvellous, wonderful problems for ourselves, and lifetimes of research grants and so on that we can't do without, or think we can, that way around. But there's not one piece of neuroscientific research that has come out of the laboratory from Sherrington, Hewlings Jackson, and the rest of them that has made any serious difference to the way I regard myself and other people and the way I live my life as a human being. And but it has made a great deal of difference in the way we treat our patients, like laboratory rats. That's the way we now bring up our children, operant conditioning and all the rest of it, and get them early enough so that we get them. Prevention is better than cure. Get them before they develop schizophrenia. Take them away from their parents and bring them up in a special devised state places where we'll condition them to be normal. That is a nightmare to me. Absolutely terrifies me. I find it abhorrent and disgusting. And there are other ways of being scientific. That paradigm, I hope, is an aberration of a few hundred years in the Western world, and I don't see that that necessarily goes on forever. There is such a thing in the world as curves, where something reaches a certain point and turns around and develops in another direction. So I don't think that it need increment like that all the way. And I don't identify knowledge with that sort of so-called science, and I certainly don't identify the profession of psychiatry with becoming with being the sort of the lackeys or the minions of that already Paleolithic type of physics.
Well, students, are you satisfied? With, go on through the door. But you have some questions?
Yes.
There are, since there are many new people here, would you please identify yourself?
My name is Thomas. I'm not doing anything particular concerning psychology. I once was a student. I dropped out because I was very disappointed with it. It seemed to be very much concerned with ego and the ideas of like transpersonal psychology 10 years ago was more like the state of being depersonalized, the pathological state which rendered you into a mental hospital if you were unlucky. So I have this question of what you've been talking about. Is this, there was a book by Aldous Huxley written 10 years ago, and it was about this type of philosophy. He called it the perennial philosophy. Is this what you actually are talking about? And also, if you say that the ego is a hallucinated state of consciousness, then one wonders if consciousness, to start with, how does consciousness conceive of this image of itself as being the ego? And how do you go beyond that? And is it you say it's possible to go beyond the image of ego, using perhaps some techniques from different types of meditation. But why do we get into this state of feeling like we are separate people in this bag of bones, and that you're here for this period of time, and when you die, that's finished, it's all over with? And you're only touched for short times.
What's your question?
My question is, start with, if this was what you were talking about, if this is a perennial philosophy you've taken up, just used another term called transpersonal psychology, and then how does this ego thing start with anyway? Could you please try to elucidate that for me if possible?
Well, the term perennial philosophy is an old term, and it was reintroduced into Western rationalism by Aldous Huxley's father, Thomas Huxley, who proposed himself to be with reservations, a sort of Darwinian, and espoused deeply the ethos of investigating nature. Much more from the ethological point of view, and investigating nature free and at large. I mean, we can investigate nature free and at large. If we want to find out how, the lions and the tigers and all the rest of it actually conduct themselves, then you won't find that out by putting them into zoos and circuses and laboratories. I find it much more interesting, apart from anything else, to discover how things and people and animals and creatures get on when they're free and at large. It's so dull and drab and unpleasant to do otherwise, and there's so much that one can continually learn. In terms of then how do we get, how do we actually discover for ourselves that the nature of this body ego image that psychiatry has written, psychiatrists have written a lot about? Well, we can do that. I can give you a whiff of that in 2 minutes just now, if you want to try it out. I find I do this any time of the day and night. Do you want to try this out for 2 minutes? Just a sort of practical sort of thing, if you follow me for 2 minutes in this. Now I'm standing here, and I'm going to invite you and everyone, if you want to. If you don't want to, don't have to do so, but it's just, we have to do it just straightforward. I'm going to address myself to what my face is. My face. Now, I haven't got a mirror. I can't actually see my face without a mirror, or without looking into a pond, or without seeing a reflection of my face. So well, what is actually my face, apart from what I see visually reflected from what I call my face? Well, I'm going to approach my face and invite you to do so from the other direction. And I find that easier to do shutting my eyes. So I've shut my eyes, and you can shut your eyes if you feel like it. I got my eyes shut, and I'm addressing myself to my face. Well, if you haven't, you might find that what you can find your face. Now, if you've got your eyes shut, if what you are now calling your face is a mental picture of your face, then that's simply a memory of your own reflection in a mirror. That's not your face. I mean, you might think your face is that mental image that you've got in front of you with your eyes shut, but you turn that mental image round, put it over you, and that's your face. I want to get to one's face as a direct experience of my face. Now, so if I've got this mental image, visual image looking at me, facing me, which I'm out of confusion called my face, which is, as I said, a memory of a reflection in the water, in a mirror. I can let that stay there, but I'm not paying any more attention to that, because that's not what I'm trying to get to. I'm now addressing myself to that zone in space where I suppose my face to be. The lights are quite hot here. So what I come across is there's a zone of warmth, of temperature, somewhere in the facial vicinity where I have constructed a mental map of where I take my face to be. As I'm going to discard this mental map now, because that's not my face, that's a mental image construct, very visualized, but includes kinesthetic and all sorts of muscular cues, etc., etc. All that's looking at my face from the outside and seeing it reflected in mirrors and remembering that reflection and interjections of this and that, etc. So, but there's a sort of zone of warmth in space. It's as I'm talking and concentrating in that zone of warmth. It's a sort of quite a sort of rosy cloud in the sky, as it were, of a sort of warm zone. But what is it made up of? Well, it's warm, but I definitely couldn't say what that is directly, because it's again, I can say that that's my skin, but I'm not addressing myself to the memory of what I see and what I can touch. I'm just addressing myself to what my consciousness can tell me is my face as I'm standing here. As I'm continuing to talk and concentrate on this, this zone of warmth is actually beginning to dissolve somewhat. I've got a distinct impression that I'm on one side of it, and somewhere it's in some indefinable zone of space, and that those other faces, like mine, that I'm talking to, are somewhere in a space that is, but then that's a visual space that is not the space that I'm now in. Anyway, I'll in about 10 or 20 seconds I'm going to open my eyes, having dipped into that for about a minute, and certainly established once again to my satisfaction that I haven't got any face at all. And if I sat down for a bit longer in a cooler atmosphere and didn't talk, then I would not be able to find a locus from which that which is speaking and calling, using the word I, is in relationship to any face. And I establish once more that what I call my face is a visual mask that I put on when I open my eyes, as you do. And certainly I can see it, and there it is.
Thank you. I'm sure there are as many questions as there are people here, and it is getting warm. And the question is, should we take the discussion in smaller groups with refreshment upstairs? Or?
Well, I vote for refreshment upstairs anyway.
Well, so maybe those who want to put questions could do that more privately upstairs. And we thank the Dr. Laing and Matos once again.